It's time for the second half of our two-part Quantum Wednesdays miniseries. Last week we talked about qubits and entanglement, which are two core concepts to help you understand quantum computers. Once you understand those two ideas, then you can start playing around with quantum computers. And that is pretty exciting. Chris Bernhardt is a professor of mathematics at Fairfield University and the author of the new book, Quantum Computing for Everyone. And here's what he says we hope to actually do with quantum computers now that we have them.
One of the really exciting things is that IBM has put a quantum computer in the cloud, and anyone can play with it. Anyone can interact with it. It's got a nice graphical interface. So the way I see things moving forward now are that we're going to have teenagers at high school. They'll learn a little bit about quantum computing, and they'll actually be able to play with a quantum computer. And what they'll do, it's difficult to tell. But once you've got a tool and you start experimenting, there's going to be lots of things that people will find interesting.
The IBM computer is called the IBM Q Experience, and as of May 2018, there are 3 processors. 2 of them are 5-qubit processors, and the third is a 16-qubit processor.
And you can interact with it using simulations, or you can actually run the computer. You will actually store your program and run it on the computer.
Let's get into that, because the state of the technology is really confusing, because it seems like I've heard of companies that have like 2,000 qubit machines. Right, and then I hear about another company that's like, oh, ours is even more powerful and it only has 2 qubits. And I don't really understand how one is more powerful than the other.
Yeah. So a lot of the confusion is through Q-Wave. So Q-Wave has got some computers with thousands of qubits, but they're very special machines just designed for solving very special problems. The question of whether they're actually doing anything that a classical computer can't do is not clear. I think some people feel that anything you could do with one of Q-Wave's computers, you could probably do with a classical computer. But what Google is doing, so Google and other companies are developing quantum computers using far fewer qubits. Google's working on a computer that's supposed to have about 72 qubits. And this will be sort of a universal computer, one that will tackle any problem that you can program into it. And they expect probably this year to announce that they've actually got a problem that this computer's solved that a classical computer cannot solve. So this will be what's called the era of quantum supremacy, when there's this problem being solved on a quantum computer that cannot be solved on a classical computer. And of course, initially it's probably going to be a highly contrived problem. Google probably this year will come up with some problem that's been solved on a quantum computer that cannot be solved on a classical computer. And then I imagine fairly shortly afterwards, there are going to be actual practical applications, probably to chemistry.
Okay. So they're basically you think they're going to design a problem just that's purely designed so that only a quantum computer can solve it, and not necessarily solve any other problem in the world. But then after that, they're going to actually start solving the world's problems. Right,
yes. The next step is to, actually solve a problem that you cannot solve on a classical computer. That's the next step. I'm more of an educator, so what I'm really excited about is this little quantum computer that IBM's put on the cloud that anyone can play with. So I hope that we're going to see kids playing on the quantum computer and coming up with their own little examples. It's much like what happened with classical computers. Suddenly we had these home computers when you could have a computer in your own home and start playing with it. So I think the same thing is just about here with quantum computers, now that IBM's putting them on the cloud. But in terms of actual practical things, I think the first thing we're probably going to see is applications to chemistry, where chemical reactions really at fundamental level are quantum phenomena, and to understand them, it makes a lot of sense to simulate them on a quantum computer.
So at a very general level, how much more powerful is a given quantum computer, like maybe the one that's on the cloud right now, to this laptop I have in front of me? Is that even a question that's answerable?
Well, it's really, it's not going to be. So anything you could do on this quantum computer that's on the cloud, you can do on your laptop. It's not until you get up to about 70 or so qubits, that you suddenly get something that's much more powerful than a laptop. And the thing to remember about qubits, that each time you add a qubit to your computer, you double the power, essentially. So in some sense, you should think of it as being 2 to the power 72, the total number of states.
Wow.
I mean, the one, that's a good first approximation. And the other thing with quantum computers is that you've got to do a lot of error correcting, because they tend to interact with the atmospheres, and errors creep in. So you've got to use a lot of qubits to error correct. So it's not quite doubling the power each time you add a qubit, because you've got to add more qubits to error correct.